My name is Lorraine. I'm 54 years old, and I never thought I'd be standing in a hospital hallway being told I wasn't family. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed as I clutched the baby blanket. I'd spent 3 months knitting, my hands trembling with a mix of excitement and confusion. I'd driven 40 minutes through December sleet the moment my son Derek called to say his wife Cassidy was in labor. This was it, the moment I'd been dreaming about since they announced the pregnancy 9 months ago. I was finally going to meet my grandson. But as I approached the delivery room door, Derek stepped out, his face twisted in discomfort, his eyes refusing to meet mine. The words he spoke shattered my world into a million pieces. "Mom, you need to leave. Cassidy only wants family here." I stood frozen, the blanket slipping slightly in my grip, not understanding what he meant. Wasn't I family? Before I could form the words to ask, the door slammed shut in my face, leaving me alone in that sterile corridor with nothing but the echo of rejection ringing in my ears. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If this story already has you feeling something, go ahead and hit that like button. Trust me, you'll want to subscribe because what happens next will absolutely shock you. This grandmother's journey goes places nobody, especially her son, ever imagined. Now, let me take you back to how we got to this moment, because the truth is so much more complicated than anyone could have guessed. 2 years before that devastating moment in the hospital, my world had already been turned upside down. My husband Howard died suddenly at 56 from a massive heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Saturday afternoon. One moment he was there, waving at our neighbor. The next he was gone. The life insurance and a small inheritance left me financially stable, but emotionally I was drowning. Derek had only been married to Cassidy for 6 months when Howard passed, and I think I threw myself into their lives as a way to fill the gaping hole my husband's death had left. Looking back now, I can see how desperately I was trying to create a new family to mother, to have a purpose again in a house that suddenly felt too empty and too quiet. Cassidy came from a broken home, something I learned early in their relationship. Her mother Francine had abandoned her when she was just 12 years old, walking out one day and never looking back. Cassidy had been raised by her father, who did his best, but was often absent due to work. When I learned this, my heart broke for her. I wanted to be the mother figure Shed never had, the supportive presence to help her navigate marriage and eventual motherhood. Maybe I was too eager, too willing to step into that role without being asked. At the time, I thought I was being helpful and loving. Now I understand I was trying to heal my own wounds by fixing hers. The help I offered started small but quickly grew. When they mentioned struggling to save for a house, I gave them $25,000 for the down payment without hesitation. It was money Howard had left me. And what better way to honor his memory than helping our son build a future? When Cassidy got pregnant, I took it upon myself to renovate their nursery. I spent weeks painting the walls a soft yellow, assembling furniture I'd researched for hours online, and buying what I thought was the perfect crib. The expensive one with all the safety features. I wanted everything to be perfect for my grandchild. I hosted their baby shower at my home, inviting 70 guests, spending $3,000 on decorations, food, and party favors. I wanted Cassidy to feel celebrated, to have the kind of shower her absent mother should have thrown for her. Weekly dinners at my house became an expected routine. Every Sunday, Derek and Cassidy would come over, and I'd cook elaborate meals, Howard's favorites, trying to keep some tradition alive. But somewhere along the way, I noticed Cassidy growing distant. She stopped calling me Mom, a name Shed used early in their marriage, and started simply using Lorraine. When I'd ask about their plans for the baby, what they needed, how they were preparing, Shed give vague answers or change the subject entirely. Derek seemed caught in the middle, always saying he'd talk to Cassidy, always promising to get back to me but never really addressing what was clearly becoming tension between us. My best friend Judith tried to warn me, over coffee one afternoon. Shed said gently but firmly that I was smothering them, that I needed to give them space to be their own family. I dismissed her concerns, convinced that I was just being a supportive mother and mother-in-law. They needed help, didn't they? Cassidy had no mother, and Derek was still grieving his father. I was the glue holding everyone together, or so I told myself. I couldn't see that I was actually pushing them away with my constant presence, my unsolicited advice, my financial generosity that came with invisible strings attached. The day before I got the call about Cassidy going into labor, Id stopped by their house unannounced with groceries. I'd been doing this weekly, filling their refrigerator and pantry with things I thought they needed. When I let myself in with the key they'd given me for emergencies, I found Cassidy crying in the kitchen with her friend Brenda. The moment Cassidy saw me, she quickly wiped her tears and insisted it was nothing, just pregnancy hormones making her emotional. But Id caught the tail end of Brenda whispering something that sounded like, "You need to tell her." When I pressed, asking what was wrong and how I could help, Derek appeared from upstairs and gently but firmly ushered me toward the door. He promised to call me the moment Cassidy went into labor, assuring me that everything was fine and I shouldn't worry. I left their house that evening thinking we were all on the same page, that I'd be there for every moment of my grandson's arrival. I had absolutely no idea that the next time I saw them, everything would fall apart. Standing in that hospital corridor, I tried desperately to process what Derek had just said. The words kept echoing in my mind, but they refused to make sense. What did he mean I wasn't family? I gave birth to him, changed his diapers, sat through every school play and baseball game, held him when his father died. How could I possibly not be family? I reached out to touch his arm, needing some physical connection to ground this surreal moment, but he stepped back slightly, and that small movement hurt worse than any words could have. "What do you mean I'm not family?" I finally managed to say, my voice cracking with emotion. "Derek, I'm your mother. That's my grandson in there." Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept glancing back at the delivery room door like he was afraid someone would come out and find him talking to me. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rushed, like he wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. He explained that Cassidy's mother Francine had shown up yesterday, completely out of the blue after 17 years of absence. She wanted to be there for the birth, to be part of this moment. But that wasn't all. Cassidy's sister Bethany, someone I didn't even know existed until that moment, was flying in from Portland. Apparently, Cassidy had been secretly reconnecting with the family who'd abandoned her, and I'd been completely in the dark about all of it. The hurt I felt transformed into desperate confusion. Why hadn't they told me? Why had I been kept in the dark about something so significant? But Derek wasn't finished delivering blows. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, rubbed the back of his neck in that way he'd done since childhood when he was anxious, and finally said what had clearly been building for months. "Cassidy feels suffocated by you, Mom." The words hit me like a physical punch. He continued, listing complaints I'd never heard before, things that had apparently been discussed between him and Cassidy but never with me. I made too many unannounced visits. I'd made decisions about the nursery without asking their opinion. It assumed I would be the primary babysitter without discussing their actual childcare plans. It'd been overbearing, controlling, and intrusive. I tried to defend myself, my voice rising with emotion despite my effort to stay calm. "I was just trying to help. She doesn't have a mother, Derek." I thought she needed support, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how they sounded. I was positioning myself as Cassidy's savior, the one swooping in to fill a void she never asked me to fill. Derek's response cut through my justifications like a knife. "That's exactly the problem, Mom. You're trying to be her mother. She didn't ask for that. She's an adult who can make her own decisions, and she's chosen to reconnect with her actual family." A nurse emerged from the delivery room, her scrubs crisp and professional, her face showing the kind of focused concern medical staff get when things are progressing quickly. She told Derek that the baby was coming soon, that he needed to get back inside. Derek looked at me one last time, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't just discomfort or frustration. It was resolve. He'd made his choice, and it wasn't me. "Please just go home, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow," he said, and then he disappeared behind that door, leaving me standing in the hallway like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong wing of the hospital. The humiliation of what had just happened started to sink in as I became aware of the other families in the waiting room. An elderly couple who'd been sitting nearby had witnessed the entire exchange. The woman gave me a sympathetic look that somehow made everything worse. A young couple quickly looked away, embarrassed to have seen someone else's family drama unfold. I felt my face burning with shame, tears streaming down my cheeks that I couldn't seem to stop. I clutched that baby blanket tighter, the soft yarn that I'd carefully selected and worked on evening after evening, suddenly feeling like evidence of my foolishness. A security guard approached, his expression kind but professional, and asked if I needed help finding the exit. That was the ultimate humiliation. Being treated like someone who didn't belong. Someone who needed to be escorted out because I couldn't take a hint. I shook my head, managed to mumble that I knew the way, and walked on trembling legs toward the elevator. But I couldn't bring myself to leave immediately. I sat in my car in the parking lot for over an hour, crying until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw. I watched through blurry vision as other grandparents arrived, carrying balloons and gift bags, being welcomed with hugs and excitement. Through a window several floors up, I could see the silhouettes of celebration, the kind of joy I'd imagined being part of. The drive home was a blur. Somehow, I made it back to my house. The house Howard and I had bought 30 years ago, where Wed raised Derek, where every room held memories of what used to be my complete and happy family. Now it felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I walked through rooms that suddenly seemed too large and too empty, past photo after photo of Derek at every age, of Howard smiling in his favorite chair, of the life Wed built together. I found myself standing in the doorway of the extra bedroom, the one I'd converted into a second nursery, what I'd called Grandma's House Nursery. There was a crib I'd assembled myself, matching the one I'd bought for Derek and Cassidy's house. Shelves lined with toys and books I'd been collecting for months, a changing table stocked with diapers and wipes, all of it sitting empty and unused, a monument to assumptions I'd made without permission, to a role I'd assigned myself without being asked. Derek didn't call the next day like he'd promised. I sat by my phone from the moment I woke up, jumping at every notification, but nothing came. No call, no text, not even a brief message to let me know that my grandson had been born safely. The silence was deafening, made worse by the fact that I knew the baby must have arrived by now, knew that everyone else was probably celebrating while I sat alone with my hurt and confusion. By late afternoon, I couldn't stand it anymore and opened Facebook. Something I rarely did but felt compelled to check. That's how I found out my grandson had been born. Not through a call from my son, not through a personal message, but through a public post from one of Cassidy's friends. There were photos, blurry hospital pictures showing Cassidy looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the standard hospital blanket. The baby was beautiful, perfect, and I was seeing him for the first time through a stranger's social media post. The caption mentioned that Maxwell Howard had arrived at 7 pounds 4 ounces, healthy and loved. They'd named him after my late husband, which should have been touching, should have felt like an honor. Instead, it felt like a cruel irony. They'd use Howard's name, but wouldn't let his widow meet the child who carried it. But the photos that truly broke my heart came a few hours later. Cassidy's mother, Francine, the woman who'd abandoned her daughter at 12 and hadn't been heard from in 17 years, was front and center in multiple pictures. She was holding Maxwell, beaming at the camera with a smile that looked proud and proprietary. The caption on one photo read, "Surrounded by the family we choose." And those words felt like they'd been specifically designed to hurt me. I wasn't the family they chose. Despite everything I'd done, all the money I'd spent, all the time and love and effort I'd poured into supporting them, I wasn't chosen. I tried calling Derek. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail, which was full. I sent a text, keeping it simple and non-confrontational. "Please let me know you're all okay. Congratulations. I love you." The message showed as delivered but not read. An hour passed, then 2, then 12. Still nothing. Finally, 48 hours after my grandson was born, I received a brief text from Derek. "Everyone's fine. Baby's name is Maxwell Howard. We need some space right now." That was it. No details, no photos sent directly to me, no acknowledgement of how cruel this silence had been. Just a terse message that confirmed what I already knew and dismissed me in the same breath. Judith came over on the third day when I didn't answer her calls. She let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago and found me still in my bathrobe, hair unwashed, having barely eaten since the hospital. The house was dark because I hadn't bothered to open the curtains. Dishes were piling up in the sink. I'd been existing in a fog of hurt and confusion, replaying every interaction with Derek and Cassidy, trying to figure out where exactly I'd gone so wrong that I deserved this treatment. Judith took one look at me and immediately went into caretaker mode, opening windows, making tea, forcing me to eat something even though everything tasted like cardboard. As we sat at my kitchen table, Judith gently tried to make me see things from another perspective. She reminded me of things I'd done that, while well-intentioned, had crossed boundaries I didn't realize existed. I'd rearranged Derek and Cassidy's kitchen cabinets one day when I was over there alone, organizing everything to be more efficient without asking if they wanted it changed. I'd bought them a new couch because I thought theirs was too worn and shabby, having it delivered without checking if they actually wanted or needed a new one. I'd scheduled carpet cleaners to come to their house, making the appointment without confirming a good time, and they'd had to scramble to be home for it. Each example Judith gave me felt like another small cut, because I started to see how my helping had become controlling, how my love had been expressed through actions that removed their autonomy rather than supporting it. The fourth day brought a new kind of pain. I received a Facebook friend request from Francine. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe this was an olive branch, a way to start building a relationship with Cassidy's mother so we could both be part of Maxwell's life. I accepted the request and immediately wished I hadn't. Francine's page was filled with photos of Maxwell, dozens of them from every angle. She was holding him in almost all of them, looking like the picture-perfect grandmother, like she'd been there all along and not absent for nearly 2 decades. The captions were pointed and clearly aimed at me. One read, "Making up for lost time with my daughter. Real family bonds can't be forced." Another said, "The best things in life are worth waiting for. Blood is thicker than water." The comments section under these posts made everything worse. Cassidy's friends, people I'd hosted at the baby shower I'd paid for, were commenting with support and love for Francine. Brenda, Cassidy's best friend who'd been in their kitchen that day, wrote, "So happy Cassidy has her real mom back." The emphasis on real felt like a slap. These people knew what had happened at the hospital. They knew I'd been excluded and humiliated, and they were celebrating it, treating my pain as justified, as something I'd brought upon myself. Unable to sleep that night, I did something I'm not proud of. I started researching Francine online, digging through social media profiles and public records, trying to understand who this woman was, who'd suddenly reappeared and taken my place. What I found was disturbing. Francine had spent time in rehabilitation 3 years ago for substance abuse. Public records showed she'd been arrested twice in the past year, though the charges had apparently been dropped. She'd been married and divorced 3 times. Her current husband, Terrence, was some kind of real estate developer who seemed to have money based on the photos of their house and cars. This was the woman Cassidy had chosen over me? Someone with a criminal record and a history of abandonment was deemed more suitable to be around my grandson than I was? 2 months crawled by with minimal contact. I'd seen Maxwell exactly twice, both visits at Derek's house lasting no more than 30 minutes each. Cassidy would barely speak to me during these visits, often leaving the room entirely or busying herself with tasks that clearly didn't need doing right then. I wasn't allowed to hold Maxwell without supervision. Every move I made was watched. Francine, meanwhile, had her own key to their house and seemed to be there constantly, based on the steady stream of photos appearing online. She was the grandmother at every moment I should have been experiencing, living the life I'd imagined having with my grandson. When I received a text from Derek about Maxwell's baptism, my heart lifted slightly despite everything. Maybe this was the turning point, the moment when they'd start including me again. The text was brief and impersonal, just an address and time. The church was one I'd never heard of, located over an hour away from both their house and mine. I didn't understand why they'd chosen such a distant location, but I didn't question it. I was just grateful to be invited at all. I arrived at the church early, wanting to get a good seat, hoping that showing up with enthusiasm and support might help repair whatever had broken between us. The church was small and beautiful, with stained glass windows that cast colored light across the wooden pews. But as I sat there waiting for the ceremony to begin, I started noticing that the church was filling up with people I didn't recognize. Cassidy's extended family, I realized. Aunts and uncles and cousins had apparently been part of the group that abandoned her years ago, but were now welcomed back with open arms. They all seemed to know each other, laughing and hugging, taking photos together. I sat alone in my pew, clutching my purse, feeling like an outsider at my own grandson's baptism. The ceremony itself was beautiful but painful. When the priest asked for the godparents to step forward, I felt my breath catch. In some small, foolish corner of my heart, I'd hoped maybe they'd chosen me, that godmother was a role I could still fill. But Francine and Terence stepped forward, standing beside the baptismal font with proud smiles. Francine was going to be Maxwell's godmother, the woman who'd abandoned her daughter, who had a criminal record and a history of instability, was being given this honor while I sat in the back watching. I felt tears burning in my eyes but refused to let them fall in public. I'd been humiliated enough. The reception in the church hall afterward was worse. I approached Derek to congratulate him, to tell him how beautiful the ceremony had been. But he was polite and distant, his eyes constantly scanning over my shoulder like he was looking for an escape route. When I asked if I could hold Maxwell, just for a moment, Francine appeared out of nowhere and swooped in. "Oh, sweetie. Let Grandma Franny take him. He doesn't know you yet. Poor thing." The way she emphasized "doesn't know you" was deliberate and cruel. She took Maxwell from my arms before I'd barely had a chance to feel his weight, and walked away with him to show off to her friends and family. I was standing alone near the punch table, trying to compose myself, when Cassidy's sister Bethany approached. I'd only met her briefly at the hospital, and she'd been cold then too. But now she had her phone out, held at an angle that made it clear she was recording. She started asking me questions in a loud voice that drew the attention of nearby guests. "So, Lorraine, do you think you were TOO involved in my sister's life before?" I was too shocked to respond immediately. She continued, "Do you understand boundaries now? Have you learned your lesson?" Other guests turned to watch, some of them pulling out their own phones. I realized this was a setup, a deliberate attempt to humiliate me publicly and record it for entertainment. I tried to respond calmly, saying something about learning and wanting to respect their space. But my voice was shaking and I could barely get words out. Bethany smirked at the camera, making comments about toxic mothers-in-law and overstepping grandmothers. When I finally excused myself and walked away, I could hear laughter behind me. I left the reception early, not even saying goodbye, and cried the entire drive home. But the humiliation didn't end there. That evening, Bethany posted the video to TikTok. By the time I saw it hours later, it had already been viewed 50,000 times. The caption read, "Mother-in-law finally learning boundaries," with a series of laughing emojis. My face was clearly visible. My pain and embarrassment were on display for the world to see and mock. The comments section was brutal. Strangers called me toxic, narcissistic, controlling. They made assumptions about my entire life and personality based on a 30-second clip taken completely out of context. They sided with Bethany, praised Cassidy for setting boundaries, and celebrated my humiliation as justified karma. By morning, the video had over 200,000 views. People I knew were texting and calling, asking if it was really me in the video, wanting to know what had happened. My neighbors had seen it. Friends from church had seen it. Even some of Howard's old colleagues from his job had somehow come across it and reached out with awkward, pitying messages. I called Derek in tears, begging him to ask Cassidy's family to take down the video. His response was cold and dismissive. "Mom, you're overreacting. It's just social media. Everyone will forget about it in a few days." When I pointed out that my face was visible, that people I knew had seen it, that I was being publicly mocked and humiliated, he sighed like I was being difficult. "Can't you ask them to remove it?" I pleaded. His answer shattered what little hope I had left. "I'm not going to police what Cassidy's family posts online. Maybe if you'd respected boundaries from the start, we wouldn't be in this situation." Then he hung up on me. My own son, the boy I'd raised and sacrificed for, had just told me I deserved public humiliation. That's when I finally understood that Derek hadn't just distanced himself from me. Had completely turned against me, choosing Cassidy's toxic family over his own mother. 3 months after Maxwell's birth, I'd settled into a depressed routine. I was seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Vaughn, trying to process the grief of losing my son while he was still alive, the rejection I felt, and my own role in creating this situation. Dr. Vaughn was helping me work on accepting that I might only ever have a minimal role in my grandson's life, that I needed to focus on my own healing rather than trying to fix a relationship that Derek and Cassidy clearly didn't want to repair. I was making slow progress, learning to fill my days with other things, reconnecting with hobbies I'd abandoned, spending more time with Judith and other friends. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but I was learning to survive it. Then I received a call from my bank that turned everything upside down again. The woman on the phone asked to discuss the loan cosign, and I was immediately confused. "What loan?" I asked. She explained that Id co-signed a car loan for Derek 4 years ago when he was still building his credit. That part I remembered. Id helped him get a reliable car, thinking it was what a supportive mother did. But according to the bank representative, Derek had refinanced that loan recently, taking out $42,000 against it. Head used my cosigner status to secure the larger amount, and now Head missed the last 3 payments. The bank was demanding I make the payments, or they'd report it to credit agencies and potentially take legal action against both of us. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Derek had refinanced the loan without telling me? Had taken out $42,000 and simply not mentioned it? I checked my credit report immediately after hanging up with the bank and discovered my credit score had tanked. I'd always been meticulous about finances, always paid everything on time, and now my credit was destroyed because of something I hadn't even known about. The betrayal I felt was overwhelming. This wasn't just thoughtlessness or poor communication. This was deliberate deception. Derek had forged my signature on refinancing papers, committed fraud using my information, and then simply hoped I wouldn't find out until it was too late. I drove to Derek's house immediately, not even thinking about calling first. Old habits taking over in my shock and anger. Derek's car wasn't in the driveway, but Cassidy's was. She answered the door looking annoyed to see me, making no move to invite me inside. I stayed on the porch and asked her directly about the loan. I watched her face carefully, wondering if she even knew what Derek had done. The guilty flicker in her eyes told me she knew everything. She crossed her arms defensively and said they'd needed the money, as if that justified fraud and forgery. "For what?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "I gave you $25,000 for the house down payment. I paid for the nursery furniture. I've been nothing but generous. What did you need $42,000 for?" Cassidy's face hardened, and what came out of her mouth made my blood run cold. "We gave $15,000 to my mother. She needed help." I stood there speechless, trying to process what Shed just admitted. They'd taken money obtained through fraud, using my credit and my cosign, and given it to Francine? The woman Wad abandoned Cassidy, who had a criminal record. Wad been back in her daughter's life for mere months? "You gave my money to the woman who abandoned you," I said, my voice shaking with rage and disbelief. That's when Cassidy exploded. Months of resentment came pouring out in a torrent of accusations and justifications. She shouted that it wasn't my money, that Id held the down payment and every other bit of help over their heads constantly. She claimed that every time I came to visit, Id mentioned the money Id given them, the things Id bought, the ways Id helped. She said I'd made them feel guilty and obligated, like they owed me something for my generosity. And then she said something that revealed just how twisted this whole situation had become. "My mother made mistakes, but she's changed. She doesn't make me feel guilty for existing. She doesn't try to buy her way into my life." I tried to argue, tried to say Id never meant to make them feel guilty, that Id only wanted to help because I loved them, but Cassidy cut me off. "You know what the worst part is, Lorraine? You tried to buy your way into being my mother. You thought money could make me love you, could force me to accept you in a role I never asked you to fill. My real mother is earning her way back into my life through genuine change and effort, not through throwing money at problems." The words stung because there was a kernel of truth in them that I couldn't deny. I had used money as a way to feel needed, to secure my place in their lives. But what Cassidy said next made me realize the full scope of their betrayal. She admitted that the $15,000 for Francine wasn't the only thing they'd spent the loan money on. They'd paid for Francine's dental work, $8,000 for crowns and implants. They'd bought Terrence a new computer for his business, $3,000 for a top-of-the-line system. They'd given Cassidy's sister Bethany $5,000 to help with rent when she was between jobs. They'd taken my credit, my financial stability, and used it to fund Cassidy's reconciliation with a family that had abandoned her, all while pushing me out of their lives. Derek's car pulled into the driveway just as Cassidy finished this confession. He walked up to the porch, and immediately his face darkened when he saw me there. Instead of being apologetic about the loan fraud, instead of showing any remorse for what had done, he was angry at me for being at his house. "You just can't stay away, can you?" he said, with contempt. I demanded that he take responsibility for the loan, that he explain how he could possibly justify forging my signature and destroying my credit. His response was casual and cruel. "Well, pay it back when we can. You have the insurance money from Dad. You can afford to cover it for now." That's when it clicked. They'd been planning this. They saw Howard's life insurance money. The inheritance had left me to live on in my retirement as a resource they were entitled to. They'd calculated that I could absorb the financial hit, so they'd simply taken what they wanted without asking. Derek confirmed my worst suspicions with his next words. "If you make a big deal about this loan, you'll never see Maxwell again." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather, not threatening to permanently separate a grandmother from her grandson. "Cassidy's family is his real family now. You're just someone we used to know." I told him it'd take him to court if necessary, that grandparents have rights. Derek actually laughed at me. "With that viral video of you, good luck convincing a judge you're not the toxic one. We have documentation of your boundary violations. Witnesses whole testify you were overbearing and controlling. You'll lose." I left their house shaking with rage and heartbreak. They'd thought of everything. They'd set me up perfectly, painting me as the villain while they played victims, all while systematically robbing me blind. The video was their insurance policy, their evidence that I was the problem. And Id walked right into their trap, too blinded by love and grief to see what was really happening until it was far too late. Instead of collapsing under the weight of betrayal, something unexpected happened. I got angry. Really, truly angry in a way I hadn't been since Howard died. The grief and confusion burned away, replaced by cold fury and determination. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to let them destroy me financially and emotionally while acting like they were the wronged parties. I contacted a lawyer, Martin Sheffield, who specialized in financial fraud. Martin listened to my story, reviewed the loan documents, and confirmed what I already knew. Derek had committed fraud by forging my signature on the refinancing paperwork. I had grounds to press charges if I chose to, but Martin warned me that pursuing legal action against my own son would permanently destroy our relationship. I almost laughed at that. What relationship? The son who'd excluded me from his child's birth, who'd allowed his wife's family to publicly humiliate me, who'd stolen $42,000 using my credit? That son, that relationship was already destroyed. Martin then referred me to another lawyer, Denise Hartley, who specialized in family law and grandparent rights. Denise was honest in a way I appreciated. Grandparent rights cases were difficult to win unless I could prove the parents were unfit or that denying me access would harm the child. The viral video and Derek's documentation of my boundary violations would work against me. Judith made a suggestion that changed everything. "You need to know who you're really dealing with," she said. "Find out who Francine really is now, what her game is, because I guarantee she has one." I hired a private investigator named Raymond Cross. He was expensive, $2,000 up front for a comprehensive background check and investigation, but I didn't care anymore. The money Howard had left me was supposed to be for my retirement, for security and peace in my later years. Instead, I was spending it to uncover the truth about the people who'd infiltrated my family and turned my son against me. Raymond was thorough and professional, a former police detective who knew how to dig up information that wasn't easily accessible. Within 2 weeks, he presented me with a report that made my blood run cold. Francine's rehabilitation story was partially true. She had gone to rehab 3 years ago for substance abuse, but she hadn't completed the program. Shed left after only 6 weeks, against medical advice, and there was no evidence Shed maintained sobriety afterward. Her wealthy husband Terrence wasn't the successful businessman his social media presence suggested. His real estate company was under investigation by the FBI for money laundering. Several properties he claimed to own were actually shell companies being used to move illegal funds. The investigation wasn't public knowledge yet, but Raymond had connections who'd confirmed it. Francine herself had been arrested twice in the past 18 months. Once for shoplifting merchandise worth over $500 from a department store, and once for prescription fraud, trying to fill forged prescriptions for pain medication. Both charges had been dropped, not because she was innocent, but because Terrence had used his money and connections to make them go away. Francine's own sister, Cassidy's Aunt Jolene, had a restraining order against Francine for theft. Apparently, Francine had stolen jewelry and cash from Jolene's home during a family gathering, and Jolene had pressed charges. This was the woman Derek and Cassidy thought was a better influence on Maxwell than I was. But Raymond's investigation didn't stop with Francine. It'd given him permission to look into Derek's finances as well. Anything he could access legally. What he found was devastating. Derek had quit his job as an IT manager 5 months ago, before Maxwell was even born. Head never told me. Every time I'd asked him how work was going, Head lied, making up stories about projects and colleagues. The truth was, Head been doing gig work, driving for Uber, and delivering food through DoorDash, making a fraction of what Head earned in his previous position. They were behind on their mortgage by 3 months. The bank was beginning foreclosure proceedings on the house it helped them buy. The financial fraud went even deeper. Derek and Cassidy had taken out credit cards in Maxwell's name, using their infant son's social security number to open accounts. This was identity theft of a child. Their own child. They'd racked up $12,000 in debt on these cards, buying things for themselves while ruining their son's credit before he was even old enough to speak. The depravity of it made me physically ill. What kind of parents steal their baby's identity? Raymond uncovered one more devastating piece of information. Francine had recruited Cassidy into a multi-level marketing scheme, one of those health and wellness companies that are essentially pyramid schemes designed to exploit vulnerable people. Cassidy had invested $8,000 of the loan money, told that she could make 6 figures working from home. In 4 months, Shed made $300 total, while losing most of her friends by aggressively trying to recruit them. The company Francine had gotten her into was notorious for targeting new mothers, promising them financial freedom while actually putting them into debt. And Francine was getting commission from Cassidy's recruitment, profiting off her own daughter's financial desperation. Raymond pieced together the real reason it'd been excluded from Maxwell's birth and the months that followed. They needed my money but couldn't risk my presence. I would have questioned their decisions. I would have warned them about Francine's history. I would have stopped the MLM investment and the credit card fraud. I would have encouraged Derek to keep his job instead of quitting to pursue gig work. By painting me as toxic and boundary crossing, they justified cutting me out while keeping me on the hook financially through the loan. They'd calculated every move, with Francine likely coaching them through it all, seeing me as a resource to be exploited rather than a family member who deserved honesty and respect. I sat in my living room with Raymond's report spread across my coffee table, evidence of lies and crimes and betrayal stacked in neat piles. I had the power to destroy them. I could report the credit card fraud, press charges for loan fraud, expose Francine's criminal history to Derek if he somehow still didn't know. Warn him about Terrence's FBI investigation, but they were still my son and grandson. Dr. Vaughn's question echoed in my mind. What did I want the outcome to be? I wanted my son back. I wanted to be in my grandson's life. But not like this. Not built on lies and manipulation and exploitation. If there was going to be any relationship moving forward, it would have to be built on truth, even if that truth was ugly and painful. I made a decision that night, sitting alone with all the evidence of my son's crimes and lies. I wouldn't go to the police immediately. Despite everything, some part of me still hoped Derek could be salvaged, that the boy I'd raised was still in there somewhere beneath the man who'd betrayed me so completely. But I also knew that people like Derek and Cassidy, people who'd gotten away with so much already, wouldn't change without serious consequences. Raymond suggested letting them think they were getting away with everything. Overconfident people make mistakes, he said, and I needed them to make one big enough that they couldn't explain or manipulate their way out of it. I texted Derek a message I'd carefully crafted with Martin's help. I'm sorry for how things have gone between us. I've done a lot of thinking, and I want to make amends. I know you and Cassidy are struggling, and I'd like to help. I offered to pay off the entire $42,000 loan myself, effectively letting them off the hook for their fraud. My phone rang within an hour. The first time Derek had actually called me in months, rather than just sending terse texts. His voice was sweet and manipulative in a way that made my skin crawl. Mom, I knew you'd come around. I knew you'd understand that we're family. I bit my tongue against the bitter responses that wanted to pour out. Instead, I played my part. I set conditions for the payment that seemed reasonable on the surface, but were actually designed to gather more evidence. I wanted regular visits with Maxwell, once a week at minimum. Derek agreed so quickly it confirmed my suspicions that this had always been transactional for him. I invited them all to Sunday dinner at my house, saying I'd give them the check then. To my surprise, Derek asked if Francine and Terrence could come too. He claimed Cassidy was uncomfortable being alone with me, that having her family there would make things easier. I agreed, hiding my satisfaction. This was exactly what I needed. I also invited 3 other people to the dinner, positioning them as old friends and family connections, so Derek and Cassidy wouldn't be suspicious. Judith would be there, of course, but also Martin, my fraud lawyer, whom I introduced as an old friend of Howard's from his business days. Raymond would come too, posed as Howard's former business partner, visiting from out of town. Derek and Cassidy had never met these people, so they had no reason to question their presence. What they didn't know was that my entire house was now wired with recording devices. Raymond had installed them professionally. Hidden cameras and microphones in the living room and dining room. In our state, one-party consent laws meant I was legally allowed to record conversations happening in my own home. The dinner itself was elaborate. Id spent 2 days preparing, cooking an expensive roast beef with all the traditional sides, setting my dining room table with the good china Howard and I had received as wedding gifts. I played the role of gracious hostess perfectly, greeting everyone warmly, making sure wine glasses stayed full and conversation flowed easily. I watched Derek, Cassidy, Francine, and Terrence relax as the evening progressed, their guards dropping as they became convinced they'd won, that it'd been broken and brought to heel. Francine dominated much of the dinner conversation, and I let her, asking questions that seemed like genuine interest but were actually designed to get her talking. She bragged about getting her daughter back from difficult people, clearly referring to me, though she was careful not to say my name. She talked about how blood family was irreplaceable, how real mothers never stopped fighting for their children. The irony of her saying this after abandoning Cassidy for 17 years was apparently lost on everyone but me and my 3 confederates. Terrence drank heavily, his face growing flushed as he consumed glass after glass of the expensive wine Id deliberately chosen to loosen his tongue. He began boasting about his real estate empire, dropping hints about creative financing and moving money in ways the government couldn't track. I asked Francine directly about her sobriety, saying how impressed I was that Shed turned her life around. She claimed to be 3 years clean, said Shed completed a 6-month treatment program at a facility she named. Every word was a lie, and it was all being recorded. I asked about her work, what she did for Terrence's business. She called herself a business consultant, though Raymond's investigation had revealed she was unemployed and had been systematically stealing small amounts of money from Cassidy's purse and bank account. More lies, more recordings. Terrence became increasingly drunk and increasingly loose with his words. He started talking about moving money around and being smart enough to stay ahead of the government. Martin, playing his role perfectly, asked innocent-sounding questions about licensing and zoning, getting Terrence to admit to tax evasion and falsifying documents. Raymond asked about business practices, and Terrence drunkenly admitted to several properties not being properly licensed or zoned, to bribing inspectors, to running what was essentially a money laundering operation through real estate transactions. Every confession was captured in crystal-clear audio and video. The most damning moment came when Cassidy, comfortable and unsuspecting, mentioned buying new nursery furniture with Maxwell's credit card. Judith, playing perfectly dumb, said babies have credit cards now? That's new. Cassidy actually laughed, like stealing her infant son's identity was a cute quirk rather than a serious crime. It's in his name. We're building his credit early, she said. I forced myself to smile and asked how that worked legally. Derek jumped in, defensive but still relaxed enough to be honest. It's fine, Mom. Lots of parents do it. It's not a big deal. Head just confessed to identity theft on camera, in front of witnesses, with no idea he was being recorded. After dinner, I brought out my checkbook with a theatrical flourish. Everyone's attention focused on me, their eyes following my hands as I opened the checkbook and picked up my pen. I wrote out the full amount, $42,000, taking my time with each number. I signed it carefully, making sure the signature was clear and legal. Then I tore the check from the book and held it up in the air. Derek's eyes lit up with greedy anticipation. Cassidy was smiling. Francine looked smug. And then I tore the check in half. The sound of the check tearing seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence of my dining room. Derek jumped to his feet so fast his chair tipped backward and hit the floor with a crash. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his face contorting with rage and shock. I remained seated, calm in a way I hadn't felt in months. "I'm not paying for fraud," I said simply. Then I began listing everything I knew. The forged signature on the loan refinancing, Francine's criminal history and incomplete rehab, Terrence's FBI investigation and money laundering operation, the MLM scheme, the credit cards opened in Maxwell's name, Derek's job loss that had hidden from me, the mortgage payments they'd missed, all of it laid out in methodical detail while I watched their faces drain of color. I brought out Raymond's folder, thick with documentation and evidence, police reports with Francine's name on them, FBI investigation documents showing Terrence's properties and illegal activities, bank statements showing the missed payments and fraudulent accounts, credit reports showing Maxwell's stolen identity. I spread them across the dining table like playing cards. Each document, another nail in the coffin of their lies. Derek's face had gone completely white. Cassidy started crying, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. Francine stood up and screamed at me. "You had no right to investigate us. This is harassment." I looked at her coldly. "You had no right to steal from me, abandon your daughter twice, or profit off her desperation. But here we are." Terrence's reaction was the most dramatic. He became aggressive, standing up and leaning over the table toward me, with his face twisted in fury. "You don't know who you're messing with," he threatened, his voice low and dangerous. That's when Raymond revealed his true identity as a private investigator. He also calmly informed Terrence that the house was being recorded, had been recording all evening, and that Terrence had just made a direct threat on camera. Terrence tried to grab for the nearest camera he could spot, but Raymond physically stopped him with a firm hand on his chest. Martin then identified himself as a lawyer and suggested very strongly that Terrence sit down before he made his legal situation even worse than it already was. Derek collapsed into his chair like his strings had been cut. "Mom, why would you do this?" he asked, and he actually sounded genuinely confused, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. My anger flared white-hot. "Why would I do this? Derek, you forged my signature. You destroyed my credit. You stole from me. You let that woman humiliate me on the internet for the world to see. You kept my grandson from me. And you're asking why I would do this." Derek tried to deflect, tried to blame Cassidy. This was her idea, her family's influence. "Mom, I never wanted any of this." Cassidy's head snapped toward him, her tears momentarily forgotten in her rage. "Don't you dare put this on me. You're the one who quit your job without telling anyone. You're the one who gambled away thousands of dollars." That revelation hung in the air like a bomb. Derek had a gambling problem I hadn't known about. Cassidy revealed that $10,000 of the loan money had gone to pay off Derek's sports betting debts. Derek fired back that Cassidy's MLM investment hadn't been $8,000. Like Shed told me, it had been $30,000. They'd been lying to each other just as much as they'd been lying to me, their marriage fracturing in real time as each betrayal came to light. I watched my son and his wife turn on each other like animals, each desperate to save themselves even if it meant destroying the other. But the most devastating moment came when Francine dropped her act entirely. The fake sweetness, the reformed mother persona, all of it vanished in an instant. "You self-righteous bitch," she spat at me. "You think you're so perfect? You think your money makes you better than everyone?" And then she said something that made Cassidy gasp. Francine admitted Shed come back into Cassidy's life specifically because Shed heard about Howard's life insurance. Shed thought Derek had inherited millions, not understanding that most of it had gone to me. When Shed discovered the money was more limited than Shed imagined, Shed pivoted to manipulating Cassidy into the MLM scheme, from which Francine got a recruitment commission. Shed made $6,000 off her own daughter's $30,000 investment. Cassidy looked at her mother with absolute devastation. "You used me?" Again. Francine didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. She shrugged and said something about how everyone looks out for themselves, how Cassidy should be grateful she came back at all. That's when Terrence made his move. The FBI investigation was apparently further along than had known, and he realized that the recordings from tonight could be subpoenaed and used against him. He grabbed Francine's arm and said, "We're leaving. Now." Francine looked at Cassidy, at Maxwell sleeping in his car seat in the corner of the dining room, and for a moment, I thought she might choose to stay. But she didn't. She let Terrence pull her toward the door. "What about Cassidy and the baby?" she asked him. Terrence's response was brutal. "Not my problem. I'm not going to prison for your family's mess." They walked out of my house and out of Cassidy's life, abandoning her for the second time. This time, right in front of her eyes. The silence after they left was heavy and terrible. Cassidy was sobbing now. Broken sobs that shook her whole body as she realized her mother had used her, had never really changed, had seen her as nothing more than a source of money and a mark to be exploited. Derek looked lost, staring at his hands like he couldn't quite believe any of this was real. And I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness. I addressed them both in a voice that was steady but firm. They had 24 hours to make a choice. Option 1 was, they report the identity theft themselves, work with me to fix Maxwell's credit, agree to a reasonable payment plan for the loan, and enter both financial counseling and family therapy. Option 2 was, I would press charges for fraud, report the identity theft to the police, sue for full loan repayment immediately, and they would likely lose Maxwell to Child Protective Services during the investigation. Derek's reaction was rage. "You'd really send me to jail? Your own son?" I met his eyes and said something I never thought I'd have to say. "You really stole from me? Your own mother? You used my grief over your father's death. You let strangers humiliate me. You kept my grandson from me. You forged my signature. You stole a baby's identity. What exactly did you think would happen?" Cassidy, still holding Maxwell, looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "I was so angry at you for being overbearing that I let actually toxic people into our lives," she admitted. "My mother didn't change. She just got better at manipulating me, and I helped her hurt you because I was too stubborn to see the difference between someone who loves you badly and someone who doesn't love you at all." It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from either of them, but I wasn't ready to forgive yet. "Cassidy, you posted that video. You let your sister humiliate me online for the world to mock. You gave away money I provided to people who used you. Sorry isn't enough anymore. Sorry is just a word. What matters is what you do next." That's when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. Terrence, in a final act of vindictive cruelty, had called 911 on his way out and filed a false report claiming I'd assaulted Francine. The officers had to investigate the complaint. Raymond immediately provided them with the evening's recordings, showing no assault had occurred and that the report was false. But when the officers saw some of the other confessions that had been captured, particularly Terrence's admissions about illegal business practices, they became very interested. Martin gave them the contact information for the FBI agent investigating Terrence's money laundering operation. Derek and Cassidy suddenly realized how serious this had become. They weren't just dealing with a family dispute anymore. They were connected to people under federal investigation. If this went public, if there were arrests and trials, Maxwell could be taken by child services. Everything they'd built, or tried to build, could come crashing down. The police took statements from everyone, particularly interested in Terrence's threats toward me that had been recorded. After they left, Derek and Cassidy prepared to go. Maxwell had woken up and was crying, overwhelmed by the tension and raised voices. I asked if I could hold him, and Cassidy, too exhausted to fight, handed him to me. I held my grandson for the first time with no one hovering over me, no one ready to snatch him away. He looked just like Derek had as a baby, the same nose, the same way his hair stuck up in the back. I looked at Derek and said softly, "He looks just like you did." Derek started crying then. Really crying. Not the angry tears from earlier, but broken, devastated sobs. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know how it got this bad. I don't know who I became." I handed Maxwell back and repeated my ultimatum. 24 hours. They left, and the moment the door closed behind them, I collapsed. Judith caught me, held me while I finally let myself break down. "You did the right thing," she kept saying, but I wasn't sure anymore. All I knew was that my heart was shattered, my family was destroyed, and even if we somehow rebuilt from this, nothing would ever be the same. "Then why does it hurt so much?" I asked her, through my tears. "Because you still love them," she answered simply. "And sometimes love means drawing lines and holding them even when it tears you apart." I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump, part of me terrified they'd show up to rage at me, another part hoping they'd come to talk things through. At 8 o'clock the next morning, my phone rang. Derek's name on the screen made my heart race. "Well, do option 1, he said without preamble. "All of it. The payment plan, the counseling, the therapy." Cassidy's voice came on the line, shaky but determined. "Can we talk in person? There are things we need to say face to face." They arrived at 10 a.m., without Maxwell this time. He was with Derek's cousin Paula, someone I hadn't even known they were in contact with, hadn't known existed as part of their support system. It made me realize how much I'd been kept in the dark about, how much of their lives I actually didn't know. We sat in my living room, and for the first time in months, we had a real conversation. Derek admitted his gambling problem had started after Howard died, had been depressed, lost without his father's guidance, and had turned to sports betting as a way to feel excitement, to try to make quick money to be the man Dad was. It had spiraled quickly. Small bets became large ones. Wins were immediately gambled away, chasing bigger wins. Losses piled up until he was drowning in debt and too ashamed to tell anyone. Had taken the job loss hard, had been fired actually for missing too much work, but couldn't bring himself to admit failure to me or Cassidy. Everything after that had been desperation and poor decisions compounding on each other. Cassidy admitted that when Francine had reappeared, every old wound had been ripped open. Shed wanted so desperately to believe her mother had changed, that she was worthy of her mother's love this time, that Shed ignored every red flag and warning sign, and Shed taken all her anger and hurt about her mother out on me because I was there. I was trying to help, and that somehow made it worse. "You were being what she wasn't," Cassidy said, "and I resented you for it instead of being grateful. I wanted to believe blood meant something, that my real family would come back and everything would be okay. I didn't see that family isn't about biology. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you, even when it's hard." We worked with Martin to create a legal document, a payment plan that Derek could actually afford, $250 per month toward the $42,000 loan. It would take him 16 years to pay it off, but it was manageable and held him accountable. They'd already contacted the credit bureaus about Maxwell's fraudulent accounts, starting the process of clearing his credit before he even understood what credit was. They filed a police report about the identity theft, reporting their own crime, which Martin said would look better if any of this ended up in court. Derek enrolled in a therapy program specifically for gambling addiction. Cassidy quit the MLM, cut her losses, and got a part-time job at a dental office. Real work with a real paycheck instead of the fantasy of easy money from home. Family therapy sessions began, and they were brutal. Our therapist, Dr. Leonard Moss, didn't let anyone off easy. He made me face uncomfortable truths about myself. I had been overbearing. I had used money to maintain control, even if I hadn't consciously realized I was doing it. After Howard died, I'd transferred all my need to be needed, all my fear of being alone, onto Derek's family. I'd tried to fill the void by creating another family to mother, by being indispensable so they couldn't leave me too. My generosity had been genuine, but it had also been manipulative in ways I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Dr. Moss made Derek face that head, knowingly used my guilt and grief to manipulate me. That head, taken advantage of my vulnerability during the worst period of my life, had let me believe I was helping when really he was exploiting. Cassidy had to confront her abandonment issues, had to accept that pushing away someone who genuinely cared, even if imperfectly, because she was afraid to trust, had made her vulnerable to people who actually wanted to harm her. 3 months after that terrible dinner, we were making slow progress. I saw Maxwell weekly. Supervised visits at first with Dr. Moss present to make sure we were maintaining healthy boundaries. Eventually, the supervision ended and I was allowed unsupervised visits again. I practiced what Dr. Moss had taught me. I called before visiting. I asked before buying gifts. I offered advice only when explicitly asked. It was hard at first, biting my tongue when I saw them struggling with something I thought I could fix. But it got easier. Derek and Cassidy practiced honesty. They told me when they needed space. They told me when they actually did need help. They learned to differentiate between the two. We were all learning a new way to be a family. One built on respect and clear communication instead of obligation and unspoken expectations. The aftermath of the Francine and Terrence situation played out exactly as Id feared. The FBI raid came 2 months after that dinner. Terrence's properties were seized, his operation fully exposed in the media. He was arrested and charged with money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, and a dozen other crimes. He was facing over 20 years in federal prison. Francine was arrested as an accomplice. The prosecutors had evidence she'd been involved in moving money, had helped set up shell companies, had been far more involved than her claims of ignorance suggested. She tried contacting Cassidy from jail, making collect calls that Cassidy finally, after 3 attempts, stopped accepting. Cassidy began therapy specifically to process her mother's second abandonment, to grieve the mother she'd wanted Francine to be, rather than accepting who Francine actually was. I attended some of those sessions with her, not as a replacement mother, but as support, as someone who cared about her well-being and wanted to help her heal. Cassidy connected with other people who'd been scammed by the MLM company, finding a whole community of victims, mostly mothers who'd been promised financial freedom and given debt instead. They formed a support group that eventually filed a class action lawsuit against the company. The lawsuit was successful, and Cassidy recovered $8,000 of the $30,000 she'd lost. She put every penny into a legitimate college fund for Maxwell, determined to turn her pain into something productive. She became an advocate against MLM schemes, speaking at community centers about how these companies target vulnerable people, sharing her story to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Derek's recovery from gambling addiction was ongoing, but real. He attended meetings twice a week, had a sponsor he talked to daily, and had been bet-free for 4 months. Had found a new job, not as high-paying as his previous one, but stable with room for growth. He was working on being the kind of man his father would be proud of, realizing that Howard's legacy wasn't about money or career success. It was about integrity, about showing up for the people you love, about admitting when you're wrong and doing the hard work to be better. He told me one day that he finally understood what Howard had been trying to teach him his whole life. Being a man wasn't about providing money or projecting strength. It was about being honest, being present, and being willing to be vulnerable enough to ask for help when you needed it. Maxwell's first birthday party was nothing like the baptism had been. It was small and intimate, just the people who'd actually shown up and done the work to be family. Paula and her husband, Judith, me, Derek, Cassidy, and Maxwell. No social media posts, no performance for an audience, no pretending everything was perfect, just real family, chosen through love and effort, not blood or obligation. I brought the same blanket Id knitted, the one I'd been clutching in that hospital hallway a year ago when my world fell apart. This time, Maxwell was wrapped in it, and it fit him perfectly. We took a photo of 3 generations, me holding Maxwell with Derek standing beside us. Derek leaned in close and whispered, "I'm sorry it took almost losing you to appreciate you." I whispered back, "I'm sorry I didn't see I was losing myself trying to hold on." In my final individual therapy session with Dr. Vaughn, I reflected on everything I'd learned. Love isn't control. Help isn't ownership. Family isn't a transaction. Real boundaries protect relationships rather than limiting them. Money can't buy belonging, and trying to use it that way just corrupts the very thing you're trying to create. Grief had made me do things that hurt the people I was desperately trying to hold close. I'd been so afraid of being alone after losing Howard that I'd smothered the family I had left instead of giving them room to choose me freely. Derek had learned that desperation doesn't justify deception, that running from shame only makes it worse, that asking for help is strength rather than weakness. Cassidy had learned that past wounds affect present choices, that healing isn't linear, that chosen family includes people who earn trust through actions and consistency, not DNA and empty promises. 6 months after the confrontation that had broken everything open, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. My heart stopped for a moment, old fears surging up. But when I opened the door, it was Derek, Cassidy, and Maxwell. They'd been at the park nearby, and Maxwell had asked to see Grandma. Those 4 words meant everything, showed that he understood now what I'd needed all along. Not to be shut out, but to be respected. Not to be used, but to be valued. Not to fill every moment, but to be welcomed in chosen moments. I smiled and said, "Yes, come in." Maxwell toddled to me on unsteady legs, arms reaching up in that universal gesture of trust that children make. As I picked him up, I thought about how close we'd all come to losing this. All of us. Not a perfect family. Not an undamaged family. But a real family. Fighting every day to be better. To love healthier. To build something solid on the rubble of what we'd destroyed. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I learned that sometimes the people you love most will hurt you worst. And sometimes you hurt them while trying to love them. The question isn't whether damage happens. Because in any real relationship, it will. The question is whether you're brave enough to face it. To look at ugly truths and choose change over comfort. To say I was wrong, and I forgive you in the same breath, and mean both with your whole heart. That's what makes family real. Not the absence of problems, but the courage to face them together. To hold each other accountable. And to keep showing up even when it would be easier to walk away. My son kicked me out at my grandson's birth, told me I wasn't family. But through the pain and the confrontation and the hard work of rebuilding, we discovered what family actually means. And they never imagined that losing me would be what finally taught them they needed me. Not for my money or my help, but for my love. And I never imagined that almost losing them would teach me that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just fear dressed up as devotion. Real love sets people free and trusts they'll choose to come back. And they did. Have you ever experienced something similar with your family? Have you had to set hard boundaries with people you love? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way back to what matters. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it, someone who's struggling with family drama or learning to set boundaries. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it helps you remember that even the most broken relationships can heal if everyone is willing to do the work. Wishing you all the courage to love honestly and the wisdom to love well. Take care of yourselves and each other.